Hey everyone, welcome back to the Living and Active Word podcast. I'm glad you can join again. Last week we talked about the Word becoming flesh and that Jesus is full of grace and truth. We're going to continue more with the grace of God and the grace of Jesus. But before we get there, let's read a verse. John chapter 1, verse 15. John bore witness of him and cried out saying, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me is preferred before me, for he was before me." It's kind of interesting as we've been reading chapter 1, if you've noticed that John the Apostle states something about Jesus, and then he moves the spotlight to John the Baptist and what he has to say. And ultimately, John the Apostle who's writing this is giving us support for his case that he's making, that Jesus is, in fact, God. And so that's why it seems a little bit choppy, but it's not really. He's saying, I'm making statements, and then there was a man to back up my statements. I'm not the only one who was saying this. So what was John the Baptist saying? He was crying out, and he says, there is one who comes after me who is preferred before me. He was born before Jesus, but he is saying that Jesus is greater than him. Obviously, in the other Gospels, he said, I am not worthy to untie his sandal straps. And yet we can come to Jesus' feet all the time. We can come to the throne of grace where Jesus sits. What a beautiful thing. He also says, for he was before me. Like I said, he was born before Jesus. However, Jesus has always been. He has always been in time, right? He is outside of time, space, and matter. But he is greater as well. He is God. He is of infinite worth. He is the creator, and John the Baptist, and we are the creation. Moving on, he says in verse 16, and of his fullness we have all received grace for grace. That is a wonderful verse. This is something to chew on, to meditate on. We have received grace for grace. In other translations, it says grace in exchange of grace, or grace on top of grace. And the idea here is that it is abundant grace that God has available for us. Like I said in the last podcast, grace isn't just for our salvation, it's also for our sanctification, our growing in Christ. There is enough grace for us to get us to the finish line. There's enough grace for us every single day. There's an abundance of grace, oceans of grace that we could never deplete. Verse 17, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. John is making a simple statement here. Moses gave the law, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. He's not making it to seem that the law is bad and grace and truth is good. The law is actually good. Paul makes this argument in Romans and in Galatians that the law is not bad. There's nothing bad about the law. It's our sin that is wrong. But we got to take this into consideration. There is an objective of the law. There's a few things that the law requires from us. There's three major things. The law requires us to be holy, to be loving, and to be perfect. I don't know about you guys, but I fall short of those three main categories of the law: to be loving, to be holy, and to be perfect. That's what the law was intended to do. It was to show us where we fall short. As Galatians says, it is our tutor. It's to point us to Christ. Its main objective is to show us, yes, that God is holy, God is perfect, and He's loving, and we're supposed to be like Him, but that we are fallen. That's what Romans chapter 3 tells us, that no one could be made perfect by the law. It's actually truly like this. I got this illustration from a man named Bob Hoekstra. He's an old pastor. He passed away, and this is the illustration. His little daughter would come up to him often and say, "Daddy, I want to see how tall I am. Daddy, I want to see how tall I am." And so he'd get out the measuring stick or the yardstick and say, "Okay, you're this tall." And that's what the law is like. It's a measuring stick. It shows us how tall we are. And if we wanted to be 5 feet tall, but yet we were 3 feet tall, and we said, let me break off that ruler or that measuring stick and start eating it, will that help us grow? No. The law is unable to help us grow, to help us to live right. Listen to this verse in Hebrews chapter 7, verses 18 and 19. For on the one hand, there is an annulling of the former commandment because of the weakness and unprofitableness. For the law made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is the bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. And that would be the grace. The Bible tells us that we are not under the law, but under grace. That we will grow in grace. That we will live for God by His grace. It's not about how hard we try. It's not how much we strive or how closely we try to follow commandments. The reality is we could never, ever be made right with God according to the law. The law is strict and it's demanding. It requires something from us. And that's perfection, that's love, and that's holiness. Whereas grace, it gives. Grace gives us those three things. It's God's unworked for acceptance, love, and His favor. And that's exactly what Jesus has brought. He has brought us salvation through grace. He has also brought us sanctification, or growing into the image of Christ, by grace. It's by grace that we are made right with Him. How are we saved? For it is by grace through faith that you are saved. Grace is what we need every single day. And like I said, I'm grateful, and I hope you are too, that there is grace on top of grace. It says Jesus is full, or Jesus gave grace and truth. It came through Jesus Christ. So maybe you've struggled. Man, I really want to stop doing this, or I want to be a better Christian. It's not about striving. It's about abiding. Like John 15 says, if you are abiding in Christ, you will produce much fruit. Then you will be pleasing to God. Then you will not murder. You will not covet. You will not lust. You will not fill in the blank. We can only keep the law when we have grace. You see, grace does not delete the law or remove the law. Jesus says, I did not come to get rid of the law, but to fulfill it. And how will we fulfill the law? By God's grace. In Galatians, it says, you can fulfill the law by loving one another. When we love one another, we know that we're in right relationship with God already. So, maybe you've been burdened by the law. And that's really what the law does. Like I said earlier, it condemns us. The law shows us that we are guilty, yet we can have Christ's forgiveness by His grace. And as this opens up to you, as you start to see that the grace of God is everywhere, even the Old Testament, but it is very clear and vivid in the New Testament because Jesus brought it. I want to remind you of this example of Jesus in John chapter 8. There was the woman caught in sin, adultery, and the law said to stone her. He was in this predicament, so to speak. They tried to trap Jesus. They tried to find something wrong with Jesus, that this woman, according to law, should have been stoned. But Jesus gave her grace. God gave her grace. He didn't ignore the law, but mercy triumphs over judgment. And this is a beautiful picture for you and I. The law requires death. And the great thing about that is Jesus Christ died in our place, so that way He could give us grace instead. Now, verse 18. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, He has declared Him. So, some people might immediately think, oh, but didn't Moses, see part of God? And didn't Isaiah see God? And didn't the Abraham and some of the Old Testament people see Jesus in the Old Testament? Yes, but they didn't see God in his fullness. No man with this flesh could see God in his fullness. No man could see God and live. And that's what John is saying here. No one has seen God in his full, complete deity. But, however, we have a good picture of what God is like because of Jesus. It says here, he has declared him, and that word is explained. He has showed us what God is like. I also think it's really cool that it says he was in the bosom of the Father. They've been face to face. They've been in close, intimate relationship for all of eternity. And I can't wait to be in our glorified bodies, praising God, worshiping him, and loving on him for all of eternity with all of you, with all the saints of the Old Testament, the New Testament, and all of the ages. We will all be worshiping this God. I want to encourage you in this, that it's not about our performance, but it's about what Christ has done. He has set us free from the bondage of law, and he has given us grace abundantly. So let us walk in grace and mercy and love and in the Spirit. God bless you. I pray that this encourages you to draw closer to God.